Marcus Collins stated, his voice smooth as polished glass, that my gross negligence on the Keystone Project was the sole reason for this catastrophic failure. He delivered the line with the perfect amount of reluctant gravity. He was a consummate actor. And this boardroom was his stage. I sat opposite him at the long mahogany table, flanked by the entire executive team. Our CEO, Mr. Harrison, was at the head. His face, a mask of disappointment. The failure was a series of hairline fractures discovered in the load-bearing supports just days before the launch. A flaw that would cost the company millions in recalls and repairs. Marcus, my boss, was the picture of a concerned mentor, forced to deliver terrible news about his wayward protégé. He was counting on this. He was expecting me to crumble. His entire attack was based on his 2-year-long mischaracterization of me as weak, disorganized, and easily intimidated. He believed he was landing the killing blow, a public execution to cover his own tracks. He looked at me with that practiced, sad expression, waiting for the tears. I did not look at him. I was studying the wood grain in the conference table, admiring the deep, rich stain. I wondered what kind of stress it would take to snap a 2-inch thick piece of solid mahogany. I was not afraid. I was not in shock. I was simply analyzing the structural integrity of the furniture. I was remembering the exact moment. 2 years, 4 months, and 11 days ago, that this precise confrontation became an inevitability. I was remembering the day I started building. Marcus finished his prepared speech. A masterful blend of lies and half-truths, all pointing to me. The room was heavy with a silence that was waiting to be filled by my collapse. He leaned forward, his voice dripping with false empathy. He asked if I had anything to say for myself. That tone, that specific, condescending tone he used when he was about to savor a kill. It was the trigger. The memory hit me, not as a flood of pain, but as a cold, clear data point. 2 years ago, his private office. The heavy door shut. The mask of the public mentor was gone. And the narcissistic rage was fully present. He was screaming. His face a blotchy, terrifying purple. He was screaming because I had dared to question an order, to politely point out a safety discrepancy. He had picked up a heavy 3-ring binder and thrown it. Not at me, but near me. It struck the wall just past my ear and exploded, scattering hundreds of pages across the floor. He had bellowed that I was never to question him, that my job was to do exactly as I was told. I remembered the silence that followed his rage. I remembered kneeling on the floor, gathering the papers, and the sudden, icy clarity that washed over me. He was not just angry. He was enjoying this. He derived pleasure from the act of intimidation. And in that moment, I realized he was not a boss. He was a sadist. A liability. He thought that day he had broken me. He was wrong. He had forged me. He had given me my new, singular purpose. He just had no idea that his role in my new project was that of the primary test subject. Now, in the boardroom, that silence returned. But this time, it was my silence. I let it stretch. I let it hang in the air, growing heavier and more uncomfortable for everyone else. I watched the other executives shift in their seats. I watched Marcus's practiced smile tighten at the edges. He needed my emotional breakdown. He needed me to be the victim he had cast me as. My silence was denying him his payoff. Mr. Harrison, the CEO, finally broke it, tapping his pen on the table, asking, "Well, Ms. Vance." I finally lifted my gaze. I looked past Marcus, as if he were a piece of furniture, and locked eyes with Mr. Harrison. He thought this was a fight. He did not understand that this was a vivisection, and he was the specimen. He believed he was the predator, but he had been the prey for 730 days. My voice, when I spoke, was flat, Cold. And clear. I replied that I did. I asked Marcus if he would prefer to pull up his email, or if I should use the projector. For a brief moment, Marcus's mask of concern faltered, replaced by genuine, smug amusement. He actually scoffed. He looked at Mr. Harrison and waved a dismissive hand, as if I were a hysterical child. He said this was not about email. This was about my fundamental incompetence. He was still performing, still blinded by an ego so massive it generated its own gravity. He could not conceive of a reality where he was not the smartest man in the room. He still believed, even after my challenge, that this was just a pathetic, disorganized attempt to deflect blame. I watched him. I watched the condescending pity return to his eyes. He was so addicted to the sound of his own voice, so pathologically certain of his superiority, that he failed to recognize the executioner's calm. He did not realize that the trap, set 2 years ago, had just sprung. He thought I was bringing a knife to a gunfight. He had no idea I had already dropped the atomic bomb and was merely waiting for the shockwave to hit him. I stood up slowly. The chair made no sound on the thick carpet. I walked, not in a hurry, to the large multimedia projector at the end of the table. I connected my laptop. My hands were perfectly steady. I turned to face the room, my eyes again on Mr. Harrison, the CEO. I announced that, as they all knew, Marcus had always prioritized efficiency. To support that, I followed a strict confirmation protocol for all verbal directives. This was simply to ensure clarity and alignment on all high-level projects. Marcus's smile vanished. His eyes narrowed. He did not understand the protocol, and he hated what he did not understand. The projector screen lit up, displaying my email client. The executives leaned forward. I had a single folder on my desktop. It was labeled, simply, M.A. Directives. I opened it. Inside were 84 subfolders, each meticulously named by date and project. A low murmur started in the room. I could feel Marcus's sudden, sharp intake of breath. This was not incompetence. This was not disorganization. This was a vault. He wanted me to be weak. He trained me to be a weapon. He wanted me to be stupid. He taught me to be meticulous. He demanded I be silent. He gave me the time to build this. I located and clicked the folder labeled Keystone Project, Stress Test Protocol, Bypass. One email was inside. I opened it. I projected it for the entire room to see. The date was 3 months prior. Just as the Keystone build was beginning, I let them read it. My own inner voice, reciting the words I knew by heart. The email stated, Marcus, just to confirm your direct verbal order from 10:05 a.m. today, you have directed me to skip the mandated 48-hour structural integrity stress test for the new composite. You have further directed me to utilize the cheaper alpha composite, despite my formal objection regarding its safety load tolerances for a project of this scale. Please confirm. The room was utterly silent. Then, I clicked on the single reply to that message. His reply. It was time-stamped 1 minute after I had sent mine. It contained exactly 5 words. Confirmed. Stop wasting my time. The freeze was instantaneous. It was as if the oxygen had been sucked from the room. Every executive stared, unblinking, at the 5 words on the screen. Marcus's face, which had been a mask of confident, theatrical empathy, simply shattered. The blood drained from it, leaving a waxy, pale, an utterly terrified man in its place. He looked at the screen, then at me, his mouth opening and closing silently. I savored it. I savored the precise moment his brain processed the truth. His fatal flaw was not just his sadism. It was his arrogance. It was his psychological need to assert his dominance, so profound that he could not resist replying to my insubordinate email with a sharp, immediate order. That confirmation was his addiction in its purest form. It was the digital proof of his ego, and I had collected every single instance of it. I finally turned my gaze. Slowly. From the CEO to Marcus. He was trembling. A slight, barely perceptible vibration. The strategic battle was over. The annihilation was complete. I looked back at Mr. Harrison, who looked like he was going to be sick. I said the project did not fail due to negligence. It failed due to obedience. And I told him I had 83 more confirmations. Mr. Harrison, I said they covered everything from regulatory shortcuts he ordered me to take on the Apex project, to the systematically falsified expense reports for the last 2 fiscal years. The silence that followed my final statement was absolute. It was a vacuum. Heavy and cold. Mr. Harrison, the CEO, did not look at Marcus. He looked at me. His face was no longer disappointed. It was pale, sharp, and calculating. He was processing the words falsified expense reports and regulatory shortcuts. He was no longer a manager. He was a man staring at a legal abyss. His eyes flickered for 1 second to Sarah Jensen, our general counsel, who was sitting to his right. She gave him a single, almost imperceptible nod. The legal exposure had been confirmed. The first domino was now balanced on its edge. And Harrison's fear was the push it needed. Harrison's voice cut through the stillness. It was not a request. He ordered Sarah to secure Mr. Sagre, Collins's laptop. Now. And to get security. This was the trigger. This was the moment the theoretical became real. Marcus, who had been frozen in a state of waxy, silent shock, snapped. The mask of the concerned mentor did not just crack, it vaporized. The narcissistic rage that I knew so well erupted, raw and terrifying. For all to see. He bellowed, asking if they were securing his laptop. He lunged for the laptop on the table in front of him. But Sarah was faster. She slammed her hand down on it, telling him he could not touch it. He screamed that this was insane. He pointed a trembling finger at me, accusing me of entrapment, of manufacturing fakes, of slander. He was sputtering, his eyes wild. He was finally, truly, cornered. He had built his entire career on his deniable private sadism, and he was realizing, too late, that I had just presented the receipts for every single transaction. His eyes darted to the door, then back to the CEO. He demanded to know how Harrison could take this seriously, calling me an unstable, vindictive subordinate he was planning to fire for incompetence. I was placid. I was just a spectator. His mischaracterization of me as unstable was his final, fatal miscalculation. He genuinely believed that by screaming, he could re-establish the dominance that had always worked in his private office. He did not understand that his rage, in this room, was not a weapon. It was a confession. The boardroom doors opened, and 2 uniformed security guards entered. They were large men, and they moved with quiet purpose toward Marcus. Marcus hissed that they would not touch him, screaming that he had built this division. And as I watched them flank him, as I watched his world dissolve, the memory returned, the binder, the explosion of paper against the wall, the memory of me kneeling, my heart pounding with a mixture of terror and humiliation, while he stood over me, his face exactly as it was now, screaming that I was worthless, the absolute, isolating terror of being his only audience. I looked at him now. He was screaming at the CEO. He was calling the head of legal a traitor. He was trying to fight the guards as they each took an arm. And the entire executive team, the same people who had praised his leadership just an hour ago, were watching this meltdown with cold, horrified expressions. He was no longer a respected executive. He was a rabid animal. He was a liability. He always believed his greatest weapon was the power he had over me in that private office. He never considered that my greatest weapon was simply a memory. a projector, and a door I was willing to open. He shrieked as the guards physically dragged him from the room. His voice echoed down the hall, yelling that this was not over, that I would not get away with this. I watched him go. I felt nothing. No fear. No pity. Not even victory. I simply watched the first domino fall. Exactly as I had calculated it would. The strategic battle was over. This was just the cleanup. The boardroom was cleared. The security guards were gone. Marcus was gone. And the heavy, vibrating silence of his rage had been replaced by a new, colder atmosphere. It was the sterile silence of legal containment. Mr. Harrison, Sarah Jensen, and I were the only ones left. Harrison's face was gray. He was no longer looking at me as a subordinate, but as the sole possessor of a corporate bomb. He said that they needed everything. Every email. Every file. Sarah, the lawyer, clarified. This was now a full internal investigation, led by external counsel. The firm of Davis and Lynch would be handling it. They would need my complete cooperation. I nodded. Cooperation. That is what they called it. I called it handing them the shovel I had spent 2 years designing, so they could dig the grave. The next time I was called into a meeting, it was not the executive boardroom. It was a smaller, sterile conference room I had never been in before. 2 people were waiting for me, a man and a woman, both dressed in severe, expensive suits. They introduced themselves as the external counsel Harrison had mentioned. They were polite, but their eyes were like surgical steel. They were here to assess the damage, to find the edges of the rot I had uncovered. The male lawyer started entities. He said that, Ms. Vance. They understood this was difficult. He wanted to assure me that I was protected. They just needed to understand the scope of what Mr. Pauna Collins was doing. He was still operating from the old script. He still thought I was a victim. I said nothing. I simply took a small, encrypted USB drive from my bag and placed it on the table. I told them that everything they needed was on this drive. It was a complete archive of the M.A. directives folder, containing all 84 project files and their corresponding email confirmations. They looked at the drive, then at each other. They plugged it into their laptop. I watched the woman's eyes widen as she saw the folder structure. She clicked one at random. Apex Project, Emissions Bypass. She read the email, read the confirmed reply, and her breath hitched. The man took the laptop. He clicked on another. Regulatory filing, Q2, data omission. He read my confirmation email. He read Marcus's reply. Confirmed. Stop stalling. I was almost amused. They had come here expecting a he said, she said case. They were expecting a crying victim and a bully. They were not expecting a spreadsheet of his destruction. They were not expecting a meticulous, 2-year-long archive of his sociopathy. The male lawyer scrolled, his face growing paler. He whispered, "My God." He said this was not just the Keystone Project. This was systemic. I replied that it was the investigation, in that moment, expanded. This was no longer about a failed project. This was about a pattern of regulatory fraud, safety violations, and, as they were about to discover, financial embezzlement. I watched the woman's cursor hover, then click. On one of the oldest folders, it was labeled Expense Report, Q4, Jewelry. As she opened it, the memory flashed, clear and sharp. The first trap I ever set. It felt like a lifetime ago. Marcus, tossing a crinkled receipt onto my desk. It was from a high-end jewelry store. For $5,000. He had told me, without looking at me, to file it as a client dinner with a supplier I knew he had not met. I knew who the jewelry was for. I had seen him with his mistress at a gala. That was the day I created the confirmation protocol. The email I sent him was polite, almost subservient. It read, Marcus, just confirming this $5,000 receipt from Tiffany's is to be filed as a client dinner with R&D Solutions. Please confirm this directive. His reply, sent seconds later, dripped with his usual laissez arrogance. Confirmed. Stop being so paranoid. Elisa. And just do your job. I watched the female lawyer read that exchange. Her eyes lifted from the screen and met mine. There was no pity in her look now. There was only a cold, professional shock. She looked at her partner, stating that this one was wire fraud. He had used company funds for a personal item and ordered her to falsify the record. He told me to stop being paranoid. He told me to just do my job. So, I did. My job, as I defined it that day, was to make sure that his arrogance, his carelessness, and his corruption were all documented. He thought I was paranoid. He was wrong. I was just meticulous. And that paranoia had just become Exhibit A in a federal fraud investigation. It took 3 days for the next domino to fall. I had been working in a state of strange, cold quiet. The office was aware of Marcus's suspension. But the official story was a vague internal review. The investigation, led by the external counsel, was proceeding with brutal silence efficiency. They had my archive. They were now, I knew, cross-referencing my 84 confirmed directives with the company's digital ledgers and safety logs. Marcus was, for the moment, silent, locked out of his accounts, stewing in his own narcissistic rage. I knew he would not stay silent for long. His ego would not permit it. He was a cornered animal, and cornered animals always lash out. The attack came on a Thursday morning, not through a corporate email, but through an industry blog. A notorious, rumor-mongering insider columnist posted a scathing article. I received the link from an anonymous email. The headline was explosive: Keystone Whistleblower or Unstable Extortionist Sources Allege, a Vindictive Plot at Major Firm. I read it calmly, sipping my morning coffee. The article was a masterpiece of poisoning the well against me. It painted a picture of a deeply troubled and unstable junior employee me who, upon facing termination for incompetence, had manufactured a series of fake emails to extort the company and destroy a respected, brilliant executive, Marcus. It was a perfect echo of the exact words he had screamed as security dragged him from the boardroom. It was the vilest form of hypocrisy. I finished the article and felt nothing. No, that is not true. I felt a cold, deep, and satisfying amusement. This was his move. This was the desperate, flailing attack of a man who had already lost. I almost laughed. His fatal miscalculation, his one true, defining flaw, was that he still believed I was disorganized. He still believed I was the unstable and incompetent woman he had spent 2 years trying to convince me I was. He genuinely believed this was a he said, she said scenario. He thought he could win in the court of public opinion because he had always been the better actor. He had no concept of metadata. He was a man of loud words and violent gestures. He did not understand the silent, unchangeable, and eternal truth of a server log. He did not realize that the moment I handed that USB drive to the lawyers, the truth was no longer a matter of opinion. Those lawyers were not my lawyers. They were the company's lawyers. Their only job was to protect the company, and the first thing they would have done, the very first action of any competent counsel, was to verify my evidence. They would have pulled the server-side logs, and those logs would have shown every email, every reply, every timestamp, tied directly to his IP address, his desktop, his phone. The emails were not manufactured. They were ironclad. They were unforgeable. Marcus, in his arrogance, had just attacked the company's only credible witness. He had just publicly accused the company of being fooled by fake emails that their own lawyers had already verified as authentic. The third domino did not just fall, it shattered. By noon, the blogger's attack had backfired so spectacularly, it was almost beautiful. The company, which had been trying to handle this internal review quietly, was forced to respond. Harrison and the legal team had to protect the integrity of their own investigation. And by extension, they had to protect me. An official corporate statement was released to all major financial news outlets. It began, in response to false and defamatory statements, the company wishes to clarify its position. We are conducting a thorough investigation into serious allegations of misconduct by a suspended executive. We have full confidence in the integrity of our investigation and the evidence provided. The employee cooperating with this review, Ms. Elisa Vance, has our full support. We are exploring all legal options in response to these retaliatory and baseless claims. I read the statement 3 times. I savored every word. Full confidence in the evidence. Full support. Retaliatory and baseless claims. Marcus had tried to paint me as an unstable liar. He had only succeeded in forcing the entire corporation to publicly, legally, and permanently validate me as the voice of truth. He had tried to poison the well. Instead, he had handed me a megaphone and told the world I was the one to believe. I copied the statement and saved it. It was a new kind of confirmation. The company's public statement in my defense was a tactical necessity, but it was also a match thrown on dry tinder. The failed smear campaign had now publicly tied the company's reputation to the integrity of my evidence. The dominoes were no longer falling in private. They were now falling in the town square for everyone to see. A week passed, a week of hollow, anxious silence in the hallways. Then, I was summoned again, not to the boardroom, and not to the sterile meeting room of the external counsel. This time, I was called to Mr. Plaber, Harrison's private office, the one on the top floor with the view of the entire city. When I entered, Sarah Jensen, the general counsel, was already there. So were the 2 lawyers from Davis and Lynch. The mood in the room was not angry. It was heavy. It was the calculated, oppressive atmosphere of profound damage control. Harrison gestured to a chair, asking me to please sit down. He did not sit behind his desk. He sat in one of the guest chairs, attempting a posture of collaboration. It did not work. The male lawyer, Mr. Davis, steepled his fingers. He began, his voice flat. He said, "Ms. Vance, we have completed our initial internal review. We have cross-referenced your entire archive with the company's server logs, financial records, and safety reports." He paused, looking at his partner, then back at me. He stated that the liability I had uncovered was significant, catastrophic. In fact, I remained silent, my hands folded in my lap. I was not a victim here. I was not an employee. In this room, at this moment, I was the fulcrum. Sarah Jensen, or lawyer. Picked up, she said the keystone directive, using my own folder name, was a clear and willful violation of federal OSHA regulations. The fines alone could be staggering. The emissions bypass on the Apex project was similarly criminal. Mr. Davis added that this was before they even got to the financials. The jewelry expense report was textbook wire fraud. The data omission for the Q2 filing was a direct violation of SEC disclosure rules. I watched them. They were not here to congratulate me. They were here because my protocol, my 2-year project, had put them in an inescapable box. They despised Marcus for what he had done, for the risk he had exposed them to. But they were absolutely terrified of the evidence I had so calmly provided. They were terrified of me. Harrison finally spoke. His voice strained. He said that given the systemic nature of these actions, and given Mr. Baca, Collins's recent public statements, they were left with only one viable course of action. I knew what was coming. I had planned for it. The female lawyer, Miss Lynch delivered the final line. She stated that to protect this firm and its shareholders from federal charges and catastrophic sanctions, they would be making a formal and immediate self-report to the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, and the District Attorney's Office. They would be referring their entire investigative file, including my complete archive, to them for criminal review. And there it was, the real victory, the true, strategic purpose of my plan. This was the part Marcus had never, ever been able to calculate. He believed he was an asset. He believed his results made him untouchable. He believed the company would always protect him. Its rainmaker. Over me. The quiet, unstable assistant. I remembered him, screaming in his office after he threw the binder. He had laughed. A ragged, cruel sound. He had asked if I thought they would ever believe me over him. Screaming that he was this division. He was wrong. He had made one fatal mistake. He had made his liability greater than his value. He had created a situation where the corporation was no longer protecting a man. It was containing a biohazard. I had not built a plan to fight him. I had built a trap so toxic that the company itself would be forced to sever the limb to save the body. I did not need to destroy him. I just needed to create a situation where his own protectors had to. He thought he was a king. I had just, single-handedly, turned him into the sacrifice. I looked at Harrison, at the lawyers. They were watching me, waiting for a reaction. Waiting, perhaps, for me to be horrified, or to demand more. I simply nodded. I said I understood, that it seemed like the only logical course of action. The relief in the room was palpable. They had mistaken my calm for compliance. I added, my voice as cold and hard as the glass windows behind them, that I would, of course, provide whatever supplementary testimony was required by the federal investigators. The news of the company's self-report to federal authorities spread not like a wildfire, but like a chemical leak. It was invisible, toxic, and it changed the very air we breathed. The internal review was no longer a corporate matter. The words SEC and District Attorney had been spoken. The investigation was now external. It was criminal, and the atmosphere in the office curdled from anxiety into raw, palpable fear. This new fear was fascinating to observe. It was different. The first wave of fear had belonged to Harrison and the lawyers. A fear of legal and financial liability for the company. This new wave was personal. It belonged to the enablers, the silent allies, the cowards who had populated Marcus's court. These were the other managers, the ones who had watched, the ones who had stood by, silent and complicit, gaining small favors from Marcus by never challenging his authority, by averting their eyes when his office door was shut and the muffled screaming began. They were the ones who had formed a wall of tacit approval around his abuse. For 2 years, they had treated me as a non-entity, a piece of furniture he occasionally kicked. Now, I was the most dangerous person in the building. David Miller was the first to approach. David was a senior manager in operations, a man whose entire personality was a beige suit. He was the king of not wanting to get involved. He appeared at my desk on Monday morning, a paper cup of coffee in his hand. He was visibly sweating. He offered me the coffee with a shaky, paternal smile. He said he just wanted to see how I was holding up. With all this unpleasantness, he said it was just terrible. I looked at the coffee. I looked at his damp, nervous face. I did not take the coffee. The memory, as always, was instant and cold. Then, a year ago, in the hallway, Marcus was berating me, his voice low but sharp, his face inches from mine, backing me against a row of file cabinets. He was furious about a report I had filed correctly, but which contradicted his own flawed numbers. David had walked around the corner, seen the entire interaction, seen my terror, seen Marcus's aggression. David had paused. His eyes had widened for a fraction of a second. And then he had physically turned his body and walked back the way he came. Pretending he had forgotten something. He had left me there. Now, he was standing at my desk, offering me a supportive coffee. He was not here to see how I was. He was here to see what I knew. He was here to gauge if his name was on one of those 84 folders. He was terrified that my archive contained an email that said, "Marcus, just confirming your order to bypass the fire code inspection on the 3rd floor." An order that David Miller was present for and did not object to. He was terrified that his silence, his cowardice, has been documented. I gave him nothing. My reaction was not warm. It was not forgiving. It was perfectly, neutrally polite. I told David that I was fine, and that I was very busy. I turned back to my screen. The terror that flashed in his eyes was the payoff. I had not reassured him. I had not said, "Of course, David, you were never part of it." I had left him in the vacuum. I had left him to wonder if his name was on the list I had given to the external counsel. The list that was now in the hands of the district attorney. He stammered something about how he always thought I was a great employee. He backed away from my desk, leaving the coffee behind. This was the next domino. This was the flight of the enablers. My silence was their catalyst. By offering them no reassurance, I was forcing their hand. Their only path to self-preservation. Their only way to avoid being swept up as co-conspirators in the criminal investigation was to run. They had to run. Not from me. But to the investigators, they had to be the first to offer testimony against Marcus. They had to paint themselves as other victims, not as the silent partners they were. Marcus had built his kingdom on the cowardice of men like David Miller. And now, I was using that very same cowardice to tear it all down. My silence was forcing them to turn on him, to offer up every story, every memory, every whispered indecency, all to save themselves. The plan I had built was not just my own. It was now attracting all the rats, who were desperate to prove they were on my side of the wall. The tidal wave of the external investigations had been building for weeks. The federal agencies, OSHA, the SEC, the district attorney's office were no longer just reviewing the files I had provided. They were actively interviewing, deposing, and gathering testimony. The panicked stampede of the enablers, just as I had calculated, had provided them with a chorus of supporting evidence, all designed to save themselves by sacrificing Marcus. The company was in a state of suspended animation, everyone waiting for the final, inevitable judgment. It came on a Tuesday. Not with a bang, but with a single, company-wide email from Mr. Place, Harrison. The subject line was Stark Organizational Update. I opened it, though I already knew what it would say. This was not anticipation. This was simple confirmation. I was just checking the box on a task I had completed 2 years ago. The email was brief, sterile, and utterly brutal. It stated, following a comprehensive external investigation, and in cooperation with federal and state authorities, the employment of Marcus Collins has been terminated, effective immediately. For cause. It went on. Of course, vague corporate language about renewed commitment to ethics and moving forward, but I remained focused on those two. Beautiful, surgical words. For cause. I leaned back in my chair, savoring them. This was not a retirement. This was not a resignation to pursue other opportunities. This was not a golden parachute. A quiet exit with a multi-million-dollar severance package to ensure his silence. This was the trap's final financial mechanism. I knew exactly what for cause meant in his executive contract, a copy of which I had accidentally seen years ago when he had left it on his printer. For cause meant a complete and total voiding of all benefits. His unvested stock options, worth millions, were instantly evaporated. His massive, 8-figure severance package was nullified. His pension, his bonuses, his career, all of it. Deleted in the same instant. He had not just been fired. He had been financially exsanguinated. He had been left with nothing but the legal bills that were now, and would be for the rest of his life, entirely his own. He had built his entire identity on the arrogance of his financial success. He had wielded his paycheck as a weapon of superiority. And in one email, it was all gone. I thought, with a chilling lack of emotion, about that very first email, the first thread I had ever pulled, the $5,000 receipt for his mistress's jewelry, the one he had told me to bury as a client dinner. It was the seed of my entire protocol. It was the first act of blatant, arrogant fraud I had ever documented. I remembered his exact words when I had questioned him, his voice dripping with condescending impatience. He had told me to stop being paranoid and just do my job. I looked at the termination email on my screen. I looked at the two words, "for cause." I had a quiet, final reply to his ghost. I stopped being paranoid. Marcus, I started preparing. I did my job, and this was the final receipt. The financial destruction was complete. But it was not the final act. The for cause termination was the company's solution. A way to sever the infected limb, but the poison I had injected into the system, the undeniable, server verified, 84-part archive of his crimes was still working its way through the external bodies. The district attorney's office does not move quickly, but it moves with inevitable, crushing force. The call from the D.A.'s office came 2 months after his firing. They informed me that the grand jury had returned an indictment. The news itself was just a formality, a procedural step. The real moment, the true, public payoff came later that same day. I was at my desk, which was now in a different, larger office. I was working on a preliminary draft of the new compliance protocol. An alert flashed on my screen. A breaking news update from the city's largest financial journal. The headline was simple: stark and devastating, former executive Marcus Collins indicted on multiple felony counts. I clicked the link. I read the words, each one a perfectly placed stone in the foundation of the ruin I had built. He was charged with 2 counts of felony wire fraud, stemming directly from the falsified expense reports. My $5,000 jewelry receipt, now entered into the public record. He was charged with 1 count of criminal reckless endangerment, stemming from his confirmed directive to bypass the Keystone safety tests. And then, I saw it. Below the text was the photograph the news outlets were using. It was not his corporate headshot, the one where he looked strong, empathetic, and professional. It was his mugshot. His face was sallow, the waxy pallor of his boardroom panic, now a permanent feature. His eyes were dead, hollowed out. The arrogant, sadistic performer I had known was gone, replaced by a cheap, defeated, and utterly broken criminal. I stared at the mugshot, and the memory rose, unbidden, sharp as shattered glass. Then, 3 years ago, a massive, glittering hotel ballroom, an industry gala. I was there as his assistant, a shadow by the door. He was on stage, bathed in a warm, golden spotlight, accepting the Ethical Leadership and Mentorship Award. I remembered his speech. I remembered him choking up, his voice thick with cultivated emotion. As he spoke about integrity, he had talked about the burden of leadership, and how our only true legacy is the positive impact we have on the young minds we mentor. He had even, I recalled with a cold, clear sickness, pointed in my general direction, and said he was nothing without his team. The entire room had burst into applause for this magnificent, humble actor. Now, I looked at the mugshot on my screen. This was his true legacy. This was the positive impact. He had sought to erase me, to destroy my career, to paint me as unstable, to drive me out. He was a legacy destroyer, a man who fed on the dignity of others. I had a quiet, final judgment. He was right about one thing. He was nothing without his team. He was nothing without my meticulous, 2-year-long project of catching every lie, every crime, every single confirmed act of his own self-destruction. He had spent his life building a public statue of himself as a mentor and a leader. I had just, with a simple email protocol, provided the sledgehammer, and the whole world was watching it crumble into dust. His public persona, his carefully crafted history, was permanently and totally erased, replaced forever by the single, definitive image of a common criminal. The psychological destruction was complete. The indictments had settled over the company. Unnecessary. Cleansing fire. Marcus Collins was gone. A ghost awaiting trial. His name already scrubbed from the executive directory. The company, having survived the initial blast, was now in the delicate, expensive phase of reputational repair. The air was no longer thick with fear, but with a new, sharp, and hurried focus on moving forward. I was summoned back to the executive boardroom. For the third time, the first, I had entered as the accused, the target of a public execution. The second, I had been the fulcrum, the private witness holding the bomb. This time, I entered as the architect. The room was the same. The long, polished mahogany table. The city skyline. But the power dynamic had been fundamentally rewritten. Mr. Harrison and Sarah Jensen, the general counsel, were there, but they were not at the head of the table. They were seated on the side. I walked, with my laptop, to the head of the table, to the projector, the same projector I had used to display his confirmed reply, the one that had begun his annihilation. This time, I was not projecting his past. I was projecting the company's future. I began, my voice clear and steady in the large room, thanking them for coming. I stated that we had all seen the catastrophic failure that occurs when verbal directives are untracked, unverified, and unaccountable. I clicked to my first slide. It was titled, "The Vance Protocol, a New Framework for Corporate Integrity." I looked at the title. My protocol. It had started as a secret. A shield. A weapon of meticulous revenge I had built in the dark while he screamed at me. And now it was being presented as corporate policy. The very confirmation protocol I had used to document his every crime, from his safety bypasses to his jewelry for his mistress, was about to become the foundation of the new corporate structure. I looked at Harrison. He was nodding, watching me with an expression of sharp, focused respect. The man who had, months ago, looked at me as a failing subordinate. I explained the system, my voice never wavering. I detailed the new mandatory compliance software. All verbal directives involving financial expenditures over $1,000, or any directive involving regulatory, safety, or legal protocols, must be logged. They must be logged by the subordinate and digitally countersigned by the manager before they could be executed. There would be a permanent, unchangeable, server-side record. There would be monthly, random audits. I explained that the system removed ambiguity. It protected the employee from improper pressure. And it protected the company from the kind of liability we have just experienced. I was, in effect, cloning my own system. I was taking the meticulous, obsessive archive I had built to trap one sadist and institutionalizing it. He had built his kingdom on the unprovable. He thrived in the shadows of he said. She said. In the private office. In the unwitnessed, deniable act of aggression. I was now flooding every one of those shadows with permanent, digital light. I was not just destroying him. I was making it impossible for another man like him to ever exist in this company again. When I finished, the silence was immediate. But it was not the silence of shock. It was the silence of approval. Sarah Jensen, the lawyer, spoke first. She said that it was robust, and exactly what they needed. It was ironclad. Harrison stood up, stating that it was more than that. He called it the new standard. He said the board had already approved the preliminary budget and my new role. He looked at me. A formal acknowledgement of the new power structure. He announced that the board had unanimously approved the creation of a new On7 independent division, the Office of Compliance and Oversight. He then stated that I would be its first director, effective immediately, reporting directly to him and to the board. Director, a new role, a new division, created for me. The reputational and financial victory was absolute. I nodded slowly. I said that I accepted, and that I would begin implementation immediately. I turned off the projector. The meeting was over. As Harrison and Sarah discussed the logistics, my mind went back, one last time, to that office, to the sound of the binder hitting the wall, to him, red-faced and triumphant, believing he had broken me. He had been a man of private rage. His legacy was one of abuse, built on his power to inflict pain where no one could see. I had taken his private, cowardly abuse, and I had used it to forge a public, systemic, and permanent foundation of control. His legacy was erased. Mine was just beginning, and it was written, confirmed, and countersigned